Okay, here we are again in Samanapshi in Yerushalayim in Romema, Rehov Zikron Yaakov 6. Hopefully everyone's enjoying it online, and my name is Rabbi Faerman. We have more of our students here today who are lights unto the nation. Hopefully we can continue to learn Maseches Beitsa. We're at the beginning of the fourth parak, Daf Chav Tes Amud Beis. It's called Hameve Kade Yain. Talks about how we can transport large provisions without making it look like we're doing business or doing things which are anti-Yom Tov activities. So, Chazal are like the doctors who know how to balance everything, and they prescribe exactly how things should be done so that we make sure we send the right message to the people who look at us without sacrificing our own Simchas Yom Tov. So, Jack, would you like to try the Mishnah?
Just give me what is it?
Daf Chav Tes Amud Beis. The bottom of the page is the new parak, yeah.
Maybe Kadei Yain Imakom Makom. Someone brings jugs of wine from place to place. Lo Gavi Aim Besal. Not to bring them in a basket, Ubekupa or a box. Aval Mevihu Al Katefo, but on his shoulder. All the Fanau, or in front of him.
Good. So can you encapsulate that? Can you summarize it for us in your own words?
The idea is that when you're carrying the wine, you should do it not to do it in a basket or in a box, but to bring it on his shoulder or in front of him. In other words, that you're carrying stuff which is relatively light. You're not doing a mischar, you're not doing a heavy load.
Good, very good. Rosh actually puts numbers on these two types of activities and says that what we're not allowed to do is when we carry 3 or 4 at a time, we would have to put them in a basket or a box. That's the amount that you normally would have to. And I assume a jug, a cod, is bigger than our bottles, because you talk about 3 or 4 bottles, you could still hold them in your hands. So it must be something that 1 or 2 would fit in your hands, on your shoulder or in your hands, but 3 or 4 would be too big and you'd have to put them in a box or in a basket. So if we tell you not to take it in a basket, in a way we're saying don't take 4 at a time, 3 or 4 at a time, rather take 1 or 2 at a time. That seems to be more to the point rather than just putting it on your shoulder or putting it in a box.
So that must mean, because you could argue that that's for the needs of Yom Tov, that you need 2 or 3. Anymore, it's like carrying regular weekday. It's almost like work.
Right. That's what Rosh says. It's too much like weekday, the way we do during the weekday. But the question would be, let's say I legitimately want 4 jugs at my Suda, and I'm eating, let's say, out of my house. I'm eating far away. I'm eating at
maybe feeding a lot of people.
Shabbatai's house. I have to walk all the way through Yerushalayim to the old city to get to Shabbatai's house.
Oh, I see.
So I'm carrying through the public domain in some fashion that will either look okay or won't look okay. So is it telling me to take less? Make sure you don't carry as much, you carry less? Are they worried about carrying that amount? Or make more trips? What happens when I can only carry 2? Does that mean I only have 2 jugs at the Suda? And we don't really have the kind of festivities that we're used to? Or have the 4, but make a number of trips. What would you say, Jack? What would you think?
Well, I mean, the more trips you take, the more you're carrying. I mean, it's like it's a weight. It's a work. That's not what you want. That's not the kind of impression you want to give. Remember, it's like a Yom Tov. So you don't want to carry excessively back and forth. Things that starts to look like you're doing an enterprise.
But it's actually not forbidding me from making too many trips. It's just saying, it's talking more about don't carry, let's say 4, carry 2.
Yeah.
So it's actually, if you think about it, assuming I really want 4, it's telling me don't carry 4 at a time. Carry only 2 at a time. Inadvertently, it's really telling me make 2 trips.
So it's like a tircha to carry. Every time you're carrying, it's a tircha. You're exerting yourself to do it. And for Yom Tov, you don't want exertion like that.
No, I agree with you. Probably, if you ask me, I would say I'd rather not make that many trips. I'd rather just make 1 trip and have less wine at the meal. But is that what they're saying? In other words, are they saying don't take 4 because it's too big a load, take 2, but you'll just make 1 trip. We don't assume you'll make 2 trips. So you're just going to have less wine at the meal. So they're basically prescribing for us to only have 2 jugs per meal. So if I want to have a Suda with more jugs of wine, what am I supposed to do?
Get somebody else to bring.
Enlist the help. Enlist more help.
That's right.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Because we're going to have a case in the Gemora where it talks about you invited over a lot of people and you want a lot more people at the meal, which means I really do want to have more wine at the meal. And then they say, well, in that case, you're allowed to carry more. So it seems like they are allowing you to have more, and therefore I was assuming that even though you'll have to make a number of trips, if you want to, if you choose to, then you're allowed to. It doesn't have any prescription against taking trips, but it just has a prescription against carrying a lot of wine at one time. If we're really worried about how it looks more than anything, then I could like to take as many trips as I want. That won't look bad. Every time I see you, I see Jack carrying 2, and then an hour later I see you carrying 2 again. Right? If I really think about it, I'll think, wow, Jack's really getting a lot of exercise today. Or he's into a lot of wine. But anytime I choose to look at you, I'm not going to see someone who looks like they're doing a weekday activity, which is what they seem to be more worried about than anything in this case. It seems like they wouldn't worry about me taking too many trips. If I want to, that's my business. It's more like each trip I should make sure whatever I'm doing and not, or like you said, have a few people bring the lesser. That's also okay, as long as you don't have any one person carrying 3 or 4. Okay, then this is all l'chadchila, as we're going to see in the Gemora. As I said, if you actually have a Suda where you're going to be serving a lot of wine, you're allowed to bring more per trip, if you should choose. This is all l'chadchila. We'll see there are other kulas, other leniencies in the Gemora. Okay, so that's the first halacha. Let's see the Rashis. 2 of you would like to try the Rashis?
Sure. Maybe makom.
Yeah.
Betoch.
Tchum.
Tchum kav.
No. Oh.
Within the tchum or surrounded by an eru.
Right. Now, it's strange she's giving both options. I would say both have to be true. You have to do it within the tchum, and you also have to have an eruv in order to be carrying in a public domain. Okay, but let's just take the first part of Rosh. It's a little bit more important, I think. When it says mi makam l'makam, what would you normally have thought?
From place to place.
Yes, that is literally what it means. But what does that mean from place to place? Is that from house to house? Or is that from city to city?
Oh, that's interesting.
What is a makam?
So they're saying here, he's saying here, are you moving within the tchum or outside of it?
No, it doesn't say it's outside of Tchum.
No, it's with the or with an eruv.
Right. I imagine within the eruv, for those who say you need an eruv on Yom Tov, that's a machlokas.
Right.
You need an eruv on Yom Tov. But I think Rashi's just handling both possibilities. You have to be within the Tehum according to everybody.
Yeah.
Whether you need an Erev or not is a machlokus, so he's saying both have to be satisfied. Both conditions would have to be satisfied, theoretically. But I think what Rosh is getting at is that normally the word makam would be like a city.
Ah.
Okay? So for example, they have a Mishnah, I think a whole parak called Makam Shanagu. Certain places noheg a certain halacha. How do you act if you're coming from another place? Do you have to conform? You don't have to. That Makam Shanagu would mean there a whole city that has a certain minhag, or maybe even a whole country. So when you say I'm going from one makam to another makam, you could conjure up ideas of walking from one city to another.
And more than one city can be included in one kum?
Not usually.
Not usually. So
Usually Tehum is the border of that
So
particular
that
town.
Rashi,
yeah. So then how? Then,
So that's what Rashi's coming to say. Don't interpret this like you may have wanted to, because makam is an ambiguous term.
yeah.
Don't think that the Mishnah is being matir you to carry something on such a journey. You have to be within the Tehum to make this work.
Oh, got it.
But the point is, even within the Tehum, we have rules about how you have to carry it through the public streets.
So without Rashi, you think you're going from one city to another city.
Possibly. In other words, Rashi doesn't always know for sure that you would think the wrong thing, but just like the Gemora sometimes says, Mahu Desema, what you might have thought. Doesn't mean you would have for sure thought that, but since people might think that, you want to make sure they know the right shot. That's part of Rashi's job. Make sure that we're learning the right shot. Since somebody might have interpreted makam lo makam to be a bigger journey than that, he has to say, first of all, that's not true. Therefore, we're sort of focused on just carrying through my city streets. I want to go through my city from one place in the city to another. Maybe we could just say from neighborhood to neighborhood or something to make it a bit more of a procession. Once I'm marching through the streets and people are going to be looking at me, the Chazal are aware that you are going to attract attention to yourself and people are going to make note of how you carried your procession. So what Mishnah's telling you, do it in one way where it will be looked upon properly and not the other way where it will throw the wrong impression. Okay, let's try the next Rashi. Surely.
Lo yaviyam b'sar v'kupa. Not bring them a basket or a box. Rashi says laseis shalosh va'arba b'sar kupa. To put 3 or 4 containers,
Jugs.
inside the box.
Mm-hmm.
Yasiyim, and you'll lift it up. Why? B'shum denira k'masa dechol. Because it appears like that he's doing a weekday act. Laseis masos means to carry burdens.
Right. Which usually is for business purposes, but here Rashi's not actually mentioning business. So even if it's not always attached to some kind of business activity, it's still something we tend to do more during the week than on a Yom Tov. So therefore, this falls into the category that we've had a few examples of in the past parak of activities which detract from the Yom Tov spirit by looking like a weekday activity. So we say, please don't do that, but rather what?
Or maybe al ketefa. You carry it on your shoulder. Achas or shtayim. 1 or 2
Jugs.
jugs.
Right?
2 jugs.
Why is that any better?
Because it's proven that tzorech Yom Tov, because it's doing it for the needs of Yom Tov.
Right. So what don't we want? We don't want someone looking at you and thinking that you're doing something like a weekday activity. Either because they'll think something bad about you, some kind of aspersion on your character, that you're doing something like we would do during the week, you're not respecting Yom Tov, or even if they don't attach a bad label to you, but still, if you see enough people who treat Yom Tov in a coarse way, that can have an effect, right? They say people who watch Hillel Shabbos on an ongoing basis, it has an effect on you. Eventually it'll have an effect. So you have to try to make sure that the general spirit, the general atmosphere of the city, if you can, is going to be one of Yom Tov, not of anything else. Okay, so now we say to rather carry it on your shoulder or you're in front of you. And what would that mean, in front of you, Rashi?
Or the front of means the yod in his hands.
In his hand, or we said that could be pronounced biyadav, in his hands, but meaning without a container. So no containers, just all natural.
Bottles.
Carry the jugs on your shoulder or in your hands, but no containers, because containers would be more of a weekday activity. Okay, now, there's another halacha in the Mishnah, Shabbatai. You want to try the second halacha in the Mishnah? We're back in the Mishnah now, not in Rashi, although try if you can to keep one finger in the Rashi, so when we get to the point where we want to read Rashi, it's easier.
לכן, האם הולך את התבל, לא יפשול את הקופה באחריו. So the person who carries straw, he should not let the straw or carry the straw fall down behind him. In other words, he shouldn't carry it on his back.
Right, well, normally you put it in a box. And in this case, we're not telling you not to carry a box, which is interesting. The first case, literally, with the wine, we said don't put it in a case at all. No baskets, no boxes, if you can avoid them. Here, we're not saying to avoid the box. You're going to put the tevin in a box. That's a normal way to carry tevin, whether it be even on Yom Tov, we're okay with that, which is interesting. But the difference here is whether you carry it on your back, lower it down your back, which is a way that people, when they're carrying heavy loads, they carry it on their back, like the rucksack idea. That's going to be, there's a taina against that. But instead of carrying that box lower down your back, somehow hanging off your back, rather put it in front of you. Right, that's the next phrase. Aval.
Aval
Mevio. Right. So again, I would prefer to pronounce this biyadav, because if you're carrying a box, probably using two hands to carry it, not just one. So I prefer this writing, the way base yud daled vav could be pronounced biyadav. It's possible. It should have been written with an extra yud there, but that's excusable, and it still makes more sense talking about two hands than one. In any event, so again, I'm just trying to throw this into the contrast with the first halacha. You are allowed to carry a box. We're not telling you not to carry this in a box. But don't carry it behind you, which somehow lowering it with a rope down behind you, like some kind of a system of carrying it from the front but attached to a box in the back. No. That sends the wrong message in this case, but carrying it in front of you in a box, which is we told you not to do with the kadayayim, which is interesting. So you could have two people walking down the street holding a box. One person is doing the right thing, the other person doing the wrong thing. Why? Because if he's carrying jugs of wine, he's doing the wrong thing, right? The first part of the Mishnah told us not to do that. If he's carrying a box of hay or straw, then he's doing the right thing. So that's kind of indicative of many things in Chazal where you can't just be dogmatic. You never carry a box, or you're allowed to carry a box, or not allowed to carry a box. It depends. It depends on what you're carrying in the box. Okay, so let's see in Rashi. What's so wrong if I, instead of carrying the box in front of myself, holding it in my two hands, rather I lower it down the back, like the movers tend to do with attached to a rope or something, or a strap? What's so wrong? So, Jack, you want to try that Rashi? The chain.
Chain hamolich. et ateren lahasik
The hesek.
hesek.
You know what that means? Like in modern Hebrew, the heating is called hasaka. Right? So it's you could say it means heating, which is what they use it for in modern Hebrew, the idea of heating the house. They call it hasaka. But really, in the old days, they used it for just burning, right? Because that's usually how you heated yourself up, by burning wood, burning so on and so forth.
Okay.
So Rashi's saying that why would you even want to carrying bottles of wine? Nobody had to tell us why I'm taking the wine to my host's house, right? It's obvious we want to bring wine. It's even today a very common gift when you go to someone's house. You bring a bottle of wine.
Sure.
So Rashi didn't have to tell us why you're bringing the wine in the first part of the mission. But here he wants to tell us why in the world would you be carrying a box of hay? Right? If you invite me over for a meal, I'm probably not going to bring a box of hay to your house. Right? Rashi says there would be a purpose in the old days for doing so. Why?
For the animal.
Lahasik,
Lehesik.
hesek,
For the purpose of what?
heating,
Right? In other words, for using it as fuel.
or the behema, for the animal,
Meaning
to
to feed animals, right? So hay serves a double purpose, a dual purpose.
behema lo yavshil. Lacharav.
So we already had this word in the Mishnah, Yavshil. Did you hear how Shabbatai translated it? Jack, did you hear how he translated it? Do you want to ask him? He's right next to you. He's the fellow at the end there.
Him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Even though you don't normally ask consultation from another doctor.
The second opinion.
Second,
No, we're behind, okay.
Okay.
Fall behind.
A little bit like Tom Sawyer.
Strong. Okay.
So he's saying, no, don't do that. Don't lo yavshil
The Yavshil
kupa, which are direct.
Lacharav.
These are direct words from the Mishnah.
Behind it.
But this part, Rashi's machadish. Why? Why are Chazal so against this, lowering the box down the back? It's so much easier to carry it that way than carrying it in the front.
The Ganai,
Ganai.
the Ganai, Yom Tov.
Right. Now you see that little aleph in parentheses, the Rashi
Yeah.
aleph in parentheses? That shows you the Bach. Do you know how to read the Bach? Are you familiar with the Bach?
Down below.
It's usually on the side. Mine is directly to the side of the Rashi. But in every edition it's a bit different. It's called Hagos Habach.
Okay, here it is. Rashi.
So he just quotes where he's telling you, Rashi Dibur Masel V'chein, that's the address, the GPS. The Chula, I mean he's not going to go through the whole Rashi.
Etc.
It's the part where exactly where the letter appears is where it says Diganai Yom Tov Hu. Okay, Shanira we already have in our Rashi. So the only word the Bach adds is the word Hu. Okay, you see? So without the Bach we would have read it, why are Chazal bothered with me carrying a box down the back of right down my back, is because it's a Ganai Yom Tov. Ganai Yom Tov. It's a disgrace. It's like degrading, called degrading for Yom Tov. Now he puts in the word Hu, which just makes it a more complete sentence. It is. In other words, it's like the it is. So the Bach felt, or perhaps he even had a manuscript. Often the Bach will make a change without a particular manuscript where he saw the more full girsa. He sometimes just adds it on out of logic, they say. But either way, usually it's a helpful little making it a more proper sentence in this case, right? So again, Rashi's giving the reasoning for Chazal because they're worried that if you do carry the box down the back, it's a Ganai for Yom Tov, right? It's somehow degrading for Yom Tov. But still, the words make sense, but why? Why is it so bad to carry it down your back? So he said, Rashi adds an extra word here. Shenire. No, it appears. It's a passive. You're right. Nun could make it into the future we will. It also has the effect of making it into a passive verb. You have to guess on context whether it's the nun making it passive, like in this case.
Right.
Usually that's what the Chazal are worried about. In a lot of these halachas, we've had that same kind of thing. It looks like this, it looks like that. For example, here, Rashi said it before. Denire kemaisechol. Here he's saying the same kind of thing. So a lot of these halachas that we are encountering in this part of the Masechta, and in fact a lot of halachas that Chazal generally decree, have a lot to do with how things appear. Right? Where Jews are very much into appearances, not because we want to have the most expensive chandelier or anything like that. That's not the kind of appearances we should be worried about. But we have to also be worried about how we appear if we appear to be doing an Avera. Right? We do not want to do anything. Anyone know why we are supposed to be careful that we shouldn't even look like we're doing an Avera?
Morris Iron.
It's called Marasayan, that is correct. That's normally how we refer to it. But there's a biblical verse which actually instructs us to be careful not to do anything that even appears to be an Avera. Anyone know that verse? It's good because it gives more of a context to all the Rabbanans. It's not just the Rabbanan telling you always worry about how you look. It's also because the Chazal understood it from the Torah point of view that the Torah wants us to worry about how we look, to make sure we look above board, as they say. Anyone know the pasuk in Chumash? There's a pasuk that says V'yisem nekiim b'einei Hashem u'b'einei ha'adam. Right, so it's a funny expression. It might be, but I think it's actually in Sefer Devarim. I can't remember the exact parsha. But Leonard, I'll try to find the exact pasuk. But it's a good pasuk to memorize. It's actually interesting because if you look in the Sefer Mesilas Yesharim, if anyone ever learned Sefer Mesilas Yesharim, which I highly recommend, at least learning it once, see the full picture of how an Adam Hashalim is supposed to act. They say Yosef, what saved him from sinning with Ashes Potiphara was that the image of his father appeared to him. So many people say, look, if I'm in the middle of an Avera and Hashem makes Rav Shach appear to me or some other great Gadol, so I'll also, what's the big deal? He doesn't get that much credit for not doing the Avera if it's just some big picture appears to him. But the answer is, it wasn't just the picture, it was the fact that he had learned. It says earlier that he was Ben Zekunim. He learned most of the Chachma that Yaakov Avinu had, he gave over to Yosef, Rashi says. And that till the age of 17, he was very close to his father. That's why he wasn't with the brothers doing the shepherding. He was with the father learning. So most of the wisdom of Yaakov Avinu went to Yosef at that point. And Yosef carried it with him. That's what kept him alive, as it were, in Mitzrayim in a spiritual way. But then he was very close to doing the Avera. According to Chazal, he came extremely close. And the last thing that helped him was that he remembered at that moment not just what his father's eyes and ears looked like, but the image was of an Adam Hashalim. This is what a person could achieve if they worked like a Yaakov Avinu their whole life to be a truly spiritual person. They achieved this incredible perfection that Yaakov achieved. He's called the Bechir Shaba'avos. He's like the most choice of all the Avos, Yaakov Avinu, according to Chazal. So Yosef realized, if I give in up to this, which would have been very easy at the point that he was at, unfortunately, then he said, I'll lose that connection to being an Adam Hashalim. So I remember my Rebbe used to say, if you learn Mesilas Yesharim, then you'll also have an image of what an Adam Hashalim is, so that at least you know what it is that we're striving for, and you know what it is that if you're not careful, you could lose the connection to Chas v'Shalom. So in there, he has a whole section called Nikius. Has anybody ever learned the Sefer Mesilas Yesharim? Not just the first parak. Most people start the first parak and then they give up.
It's 10 years I've read this.
So there's a chapter called Nikius, right? And I remember when I first heard about it, I thought, like they say, cleanliness is next to godliness. and you think it's talking about washing behind the ears, but it's not. It's talking about this kind of cleanliness, which the Torah is talking about when it says v'yisim nekiim. You should be clean in front of Hashem and in front of people. That kind of cleanliness means there shouldn't be even what we call in Yiddish a shmek of an avera. Right? It shouldn't even have like an appearance of even an impression of doing an avera. So that's what Chazal sort of latched onto when they made many gezeras. They wanted to make sure that Klal Yisrael in general know how to keep this halacha. It's very hard to know. How do I know how I look? How do I know how do I appear to people? So they went ahead and they made certain laws based on that. Hi, how you doing?
Okay.
Good to see you. So that's what we should remember. We see many derabbanans and we wonder, what are Chazal always so worried about? This is one of the things they're worried about, because they took very seriously this injunction of the Torah, so to speak, to be clean from any impression of any avera, and because of that, they made certain very detailed laws about what we are and aren't allowed to do. Puts a little bit more of a context in there. Anyhow, so what is so wrong over here? What's the disgrace to Yom Tov if I lower the box down the back instead of carrying it in the front? So Rashi says an extra few words here which are very important. Go ahead. Jack, are you reading this? After that Aleph of the Bach? Right.
It looks like he's intending to work.
Right. Now intending sometimes just mean like I had it in mind while I was doing it. Did I have in mind, didn't I have it in mind? Or in the Shemona Esrei, I had in mind this word, and I wasn't just saying the word, I was thinking what the word meant. But here it doesn't just mean that, because what does that mean? He's doing an act. Of course, if he's doing an act, he's intending to do it. But sometimes intending means like planning it out. It's like you planned to do it on Yom Tov. Right? So I see you doing stuff, like we said, chores. I see you doing a bunch of chores on Yom Tov. I'm going to think, it looks like he planned out that he's going to do these chores on Yom Tov, that he feels he has a few extra hours on Yom Tov. Normally he has to work. On Yom Tov he has a few extra hours to spend on, chores. People like to do chores to clean up their house. So I see that he's doing his chores. He must have planned it out to have all these extra chores to do on Yom Tov. That's what Rashi means, planning it. What intending means to plan, and therefore it makes it look worse than just doing something wrong on Yom Tov. It's like you planned it out. Like you decided a few days in advance that you're already going to take Yom Tov, which is supposed to be a holy day for davening to Hashem and celebrating different things that Hashem has given us. And you decided a few days in advance, you know what, I have a few extra hours, in a few days I'm going to have a few extra hours I'm going to clear out the barn. Take all the hay and bring it to my neighbor, or whatever. Take it to my other storage house. That's worse than just doing something wrong. You're planning it out. The more forethought that an avera has, in this case especially, it means that that's how much less kedusha that Yom Tov has in your eyes. And therefore, again, I see this person doing something that means he absolutely does not consider Yom Tov to be a special day. It's the most mundane day that there could be. So therefore, I'm going to also be affected by this. So that's, again, Chazal did not want it to even appear that way. Okay, now Rashi adds one more word. It looks as if I intended to do what? Malacha Rabbah.
A lot of work.
A lot of work, right? In other words, carrying a big box full of hay is a lot of work.
Oh, l'holich l'makom rachok l'derech chol. Or to go to a distant place as it is done in a regular weekday.
Right. So it could mean it's just we're back to the regular looking like you're doing something of chol, which is what we said before. The problem with the wine was that if you carry too much at one time, it looks like you're doing just a weekday activity, or maybe even a business activity. Maybe that's what it means as well. But here we said maybe there's one extra thing in Rashi, because when he talks about far away, again, is this makom within the Tichum or not within the Tichum? What makom does Rashi mean here? We're already talking about makom la makom. We said it's within the Tichum. or telling you to do it one way and not the other way. So we're still talking within the Tichum, or this might look like he's even planning to go outside the Tichum. Right? We're not saying he is going to, but it looks like it. That's, again, how it looks. If it looks like he's going so far away, like on a weekday, he would go outside the Tichum. He would go to another faraway place. So again, that's another possibility, Rashi says, for why this is so considered such a strict thing in the eyes of the Chazal. Okay, let's continue on. So we have two halachas, both about how to transport, let's say, large amounts of either food in the case of wine, or even hay, which is fuel, or animal food. And we have a general attitude here. Try to do it in a way that doesn't look like a weekday activity, that's for sure. And don't even do it in a way that would look like you planned out to do a lot of work on this particular day, or that you're going to a faraway place. Okay, and the last halacha, which seems to be just tangential, because we mentioned hay, and therefore it brings up another subject, but we're not really talking at this point about carrying things through the streets anymore. So even though the Mishnayos may get back to that subject, but as often happens even in the Mishnah, we go on into a small tangent here. So this halacha has more to do with muksa, according to Rashi, but there's going to be a contradiction, so when we get to the Gemora, we'll see if it really is a muksa question, but it's definitely a tangent. Okay, so two of you want to try the last halacha in the Mishnah?
Sure. Matlin, I'm going to begin with. Barimat Tevin with a stack of grain.
Okay, so what does that mean? We begin with a stack of grain.
You're using
Wait, so by the way, Tevin is not grain.
Straw.
Straw.
Stack of straw.
Okay, so what do you think it means?
Good question.
Okay, let me just start the discussion for one thing. If you'll notice in Shulchan Aruch, if you learn Mishnah Brura or anything, any of the halachics for him, you see that often we use the plural verb, like matchilin is like we would say in English, we are allowed to do that.
Yeah.
This is something we're allowed to. We do it. You know, sometimes in your house you tell your child, you know, we don't do that in this house. You know, this we don't do. Or we are allowed to do this. This is something we do. Our family does this. So in a sense, that's the halacha. We're allowed to do this activity. So it's a heter, first of all, which is
You're allowed
good.
to use straw.
No, it doesn't say use the straw. Okay, we're allowed to start. That's the verb that's being used. Matchilim.
Yeah,
Start a pile
of straw.
of straw. Now, what does it mean to start a pile? It means I start to gather it up
Yeah.
and pile it up.
Pile it up.
Now, does that mean I'm not allowed to finish it? I'm allowed to start it, but I'm not allowed to finish it? Is that what it's saying? That's possible, but I doubt it. It sounds like it's a chiddush in the other direction. Even if it's just starting it. Kol shekain, you're allowed to finish. If I already have a half-finished pile, I'm allowed to add more.
But
The
doesn't-
chiddush is to start it off. It must be a much more difficult project to start a pile.
Does it have a purpose, like a purpose for fuel or purpose for?
Well, once it's in a pile, then you can use it. If it's scattered all around the yard,
Yeah, it's just-
nobody's gonna. And you tell your kid, "Okay, bring me some straw," and he looks out in the yard and he goes, "There is no straw here." You said, "No, don't you see? Like there's a few strands there and a few strands there." What's your kid gonna come back and say? "Sorry, Dad, there was no straw."
Yeah.
Right? But if he goes to the backyard and he sees there's a pile, he can't come back and say. I mean, he can.
Sure.
Kids will be known to be in denial, as they say. But a good boy, like Svi, would come back and say, "I found the pile, it's okay, I'm going to bring it in now." Okay, if it's in a pile, it's usable, it's something more tangible. If it's all scattered about, it's not something you can really use. Right? That's why your mother always told you to pick up your socks. Okay?
Make a little pile of socks.
I'm trying to remember. I don't remember saying that.
Because you were already fastidious and did it without her telling you.
Or she did it herself.
Right?
What was that? South Africa.
Domestic assistance.
Oh yeah, in South Africa. Yeah.
No, he means because they lived on a farm and they went barefoot.
Yeah, you can pick up your socks on it,
South Africa.
We put in a dirty basket.
right?
All right. In the meantime, I'm trying to make a point, which I hope is well taken, that it's much harder to start a pile of straw than to, once it's already there, to just continue to pile on. It's much easier. Anytime you have to start anything, it's always hard. So perhaps it's just because the starting process is much harder, and that's a chiddush that you're allowed to do that. That amount of effort you're allowed to expend, because there is a toelis, there is a purpose. If it's all in a pile, it would be much easier to use. The Rashi makes it sound more, maybe it's not against what I'm saying, it's just in conjunction with what I'm saying, that part of the chiddush is also that straw might have been looked at as muksa, right? Because straw, in a certain sense, are like little pieces of things which don't really have any usage by themselves. So you might have thought of straw as muksa. Rashi makes it sound like you might have thought that the straw was muksa. Kamash Malan, the Mishnah, it's not. It's not muksa. For whatever reason, Rashi will get into that. But, okay, so it might have both chidushim. First of all, you're allowed to move it, and it's not considered muksa. Secondly, you're allowed to start the pile, and even though that it is more of an exertion to start off a pile of straw than to just continue it, that's also mutter. But either way, there's a heter to do this. However, the Mishnah finishes off. Go ahead.
אבל לא בעצים שבמוקסה, not with trees or with wood.
Pieces of wood in this case.
Pieces of wood that are in the yard.
Good. See, you knew that. How'd you know that was yard?
Well, the real truth is I saw it in the arts room.
Well, that's honest. You see, now we know that you're an honest man.
Yeah, that's right. But also,
although looking at arts room could be called cheating,
it
so
also
you're
comes
honest
from,
and cheating at the same time. No.
Also, but the word "say" means the margin around there.
Very good. Very good.
That could mean.
Which has to do with this week's parsha. Parshas Mikates. It's the same shorish, right? At the end of something, the very end, and that's the whole idea of muksa, by the way. Even though it's referring to a yard, which you're correct, but the whole idea of muksa is that an object which is not commonly used, in a sense, at least on a metaphysical level, has been pushed off to the side, pushed way off to the extremities where you're not going to intend to use it. That's why it's considered muksa, because it's been pushed away off to the side. But it's also referring to a yard, which is like a backyard, so to speak, Rashi says. But Rashi adds one more thing, which is why it's called muksa, Rashi says, is because it is marginalized, okay? It's a marginally used place, which Rashi uses to explain the chiddush here. That since the wood is in a yard which is hardly ever used, therefore that wood, which normally on Yom Tov you wouldn't have a reason to call wood muksa, but here there's a reason to call it muksa, Rashi says, because it's the place where it is not really a used place. So therefore, if it's a place where you don't normally use it, what were you thinking when Yom Tov came in? You weren't thinking of using it, because you're thinking of the norm. The norm is not to go into that place and use it. So if the norm is not to use it, and later on in Yom Tov you decide to use it anyways, that becomes a question of muksa. If you hold of muksa, and you say, I'm sorry, when Yom Tov came in you weren't thinking of using it, it's muksa. But if you don't hold of muksa, you say, look, I don't care what you were thinking when Yom Tov came in. If right now it has a usage and you decide to use it, you have the right to do so. So that, according to Rashi, is going to indicate that this is written by a Tana who holds of the Isser of Muksa, and that's why he's not letting you use it. But Rashi says the Gemora is going to have a problem. If so, then this part is telling you you're not allowed to use something that is marginalized as Muksa. But the Tevin, which should have also been considered Muksa, we are allowing, that sounds like you don't hold of Muksa, you allow people to move around things that are marginalized. So it becomes like a stira, like a contradiction which has to be answered up by the Gemora. Okay, let's see the Rashis. Sruli, you want to try the Rashi? It's a very long Rashi, so... Oh no, there's two Rashis. So do the first one and we'll go on.
They're allowed to pick up a pile of hay. You're allowed to.
Start to pile up the hay.
Lahasik means to burn.
Lahasik. Again, Rashi starts out, why would you need straw in the first place? Again, Rashi mentioned it already twice. Before he said you might need it for feeding an animal. Here Rashi just says for burning or for heating. So therefore, I would assume this is the most common usage in their day for tevin.
Lehesik means for burning. No, you didn't prepare from Erev Yom Tov.
Didn't like set it aside.
Set it aside.
So therefore, it should have been considered muksa. If you don't set aside something that normally would be considered muksa, it is muksa. But another strike against it.
No, there is not accustomed to rotting from it, burning from it.
Okay, so that Rashi had to add also. Okay, let's say on Yom Tov I have a piece of wood or a piece of straw that I haven't set aside.
I think it's muktzah.
It shouldn't have to be muksa just because I didn't set it aside for burning. It should be a normal thing to have wood. You know, let's take the easiest case to discuss. I have wood next to the fireplace. Do you think I need to set that aside and declare this from this wood I will burn tomorrow? It's next to the fireplace. Everyone knows I'm going to use it for the fire.
That's what lahasik means. Lahasik means
To burn. To burn. The hesek, the word hesek, I told you in modern Hebrew, hasaka. Remember?
Right.
This is just the infinitive, lahasik. Even though there is another usage of this word, by the way, just for your parenthetical knowledge, lahasik maskana, to conclude, right? A maskana is a conclusion, and if you want to use a verb with that, I arrived at a conclusion, I made a conclusion, you say lahasik maskana. So it is used also in that context. But, so it has like a double meaning. Okay, but in this case, it's like Rashi said before, even he said at the beginning of this Rashi, lahesek, as just the verb, and before as well, and here he's using it as the infinitive. So, there's just two things in this Rashi that's interesting. He's saying, first of all, I didn't set it aside, but of course, that can't be the final, just like I said, I didn't set aside many pieces of wood that I'm allowed to use on Yom Tov, so why would that prohibit me? Why would that be a chiddush? Because there's two things Rashi says. First of all, I didn't set it aside. Second of all, it's something I don't commonly use. That's the key. So here the tevin is a little bit like the eitzim shebamuksa. It's the kind of thing that I don't normally use, okay? So, now we said before, they did used to use tevin for heating, so what does it mean? It must be this particular place where it was scattered about, that kind of tevin that's scattered all around, you wouldn't necessarily use. The kind that's already piled up in a pile, then you would use. So perhaps that's also another reason why we talked about starting off the pile. Because if there's already a pile there, then it shows that I want to use the pile for sure. That's why I made a pile. And even stuff that's near the pile, it's part of the area where the pile is, so I want to use that as well. So perhaps if there's already a pile there, as far as Hilchos Muktzah is concerned, I would have said, he probably wants to use it. The Rashi is saying over here, we haven't made a pile. What do I have over here? Just scattered hay. That, I would say, normally a person doesn't use. He tends to use things that are easily accessible and usable, that's already in a pile. To go around, start to gather straw from the yard, not normally the way you build a fire. This guy had to, so he wants to know, can he? And that's what Rashi's saying. Even though you didn't set it aside. But that's not always the end of the story. If I normally use such things, then I don't need to set it aside. But I don't normally use this either. So that's two strikes against it. So therefore, how come I can use this? It should have been muksa. That's what Rashi has created up until this part of the Rashi. He's sort of created that tension. Even though it doesn't have two major things which should have been going for it. He hasn't set it aside, and it's not normally used, so it should have been muksa. So why am I allowed to do this? Why am I allowed to take this and set it up in a pile?
Hashta mashma leis le muktzah. Plus the verb the son is doesn't hold a muktzah.
So hashta means what?
Now.
Now, which normally implies that maybe later in the Gemora that's going to change. Often when we use that kind of an expression, now we're thinking something, right? It's like a salka daita chamina, what would go up in our minds to think. It's called the havamina, the beginning thoughts. So often that is changed by the Gemora, especially in conjunction with what Rashi is going to say in a minute, that we have a stira between the Rosh and the Sefer, that if this part's saying there is no problem with muksa, and the next one's saying there is a problem with muksa, that's a strange Mishnah, that in the same sentence we have a Tana who's changing his mind. That doesn't make sense. So that would explain why now we're thinking one thing, but it's very likely when we get to the Gemora will change its mind. But the natural inclination would be to think this Tana, if he's letting me use this straw that I hadn't set aside, and I hadn't normally used such straw, and therefore it should have been muksa. Now it's mashma, right now it's understood from the way that I just explained the Mishnah, and that is the normal way to think, that this Tana must not be the one who holds a muksa. We already know there's a maklokas tanoim, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Huda, good, where we saw originally Rashi brought in the first Mishnah, first part of the Gemora that were talked about holding a muksa or not, and Rashi brought it down regarding what we call Moser Shemen Shabaner, which is very timely, right before Hanukkah. It's likely to happen. For me, it happens every week because my wife wants me to use shemen for even the Shabbos candles, but a lot of people use regular wax candles. But if you use shemen, you see it happens often that you thought it was going to burn this much and it only burned half. Or sometimes it goes out right in the beginning and you just get a whole full container of shemen left over. That's called Moser Shemen Shabaner. The leftover, Moser is like from the word miyutar, like the extra. Shemen Shabaner, the extra shemen that's left over inside the container, which you call a ner. So, if it's already, the fire's not burning anymore, so I should be able to take the shemen and use it, let's say, for other usages, for salad dressing, for whatever I want to use, olive oil or whatever. I should be able to use it in the middle of Shabbos once there's no flame there anymore. But that's all if you don't hold a muksa. If you hold a muksa, then at the moment when Shabbos came in, it was usher to use. Why? Because there's a flame on top of it, and if you take any of the shemen, you'll be doing what we call kibui. You'll be putting out a fire, so to speak. So since it's usher when Shabbos came in, at that moment I kind of removed myself from it, or it became removed from me, and therefore, if you hold a muksa, it's usher for the whole of Shabbos. But if you don't hold a muksa, like Rabbi Shimon says, it's okay, once the flame's no longer there, I don't care that when Shabbos came in it wasn't accessible. Right now it's accessible, you can take it because there's no flame, and it serves a function right now, take it. So that's the shita that holds leislei muksa. Rabbi Shimon is the shita of leislei muksa. So that part's not a chiddush, that there is such a Tana. We are already aware of that from numerous sources. But what's going to end up being a chiddush, and that's why Rashi said that we may have to change our opinion of this, is to say that at this point he's letting you pick up the straw because he doesn't hold there's a problem of muksa in general. But the next moment he's going to tell you, but don't pick up the wood. Why? Because it's a problem of muksa. That means he does hold a muksa. So, if you hold a muksa, you don't hold a muksa. So that's going to be the problem in the next part. Okay, so that's why Rashi says the Gemora is going to ask a stira, and we'll have to come to some sort of a synthesis of it all. Okay, now, the second Rashi to explain why this Tana is telling you don't make a pile of the wood. It's special wood, not the regular wood. It's the special wood that's in the muksa. As Tuvi called it, the yard. But not any old yard, a special yard. Scotland Yard. Right? Okay, so who read the last Rashi? Struly, so you would like to read the next one, Shabbatai?
Sure. Well, Lord, it's in the Beitsa, but not the wood in the place of storage.
Good.
Rachba, and it's called a Rachba. It's a broad area. Shel Chorona la Beitim, which is behind the house, which is behind houses.
Right, like the backyard. Normally that would have been an accessible place, a backyard. Like in our day and age, especially in America, backyard is very accessible and usable and everything. But this is going to be a little bit different than what we would call a backyard, but it is physically a backyard. So Rashi says, so why is it karuya muksa? Why is it called muksa? That's a strange word for a backyard.
Al Shem Shehi Muksa Le'acho.
Al Shem, on account of the fact
that it's called Muksa.
No, that it is muksa, meaning here he's using it as the verb. It has been pushed away, marginalized to the back. Right? Like especially if you think of in their day. In their day where a courtyard, for example, it says most of what they did was in their courtyard, in front of the house, right? So back of the house is already marginalized. Not like we would say today, you don't do very many things in the front yard, but you do a lot of things in the backyard. Most families would probably tell all the children, play in the backyard, don't play in the front yard. But in those days, the front of the house was where the courtyard was, like in Mea Sharim, so that the Gemora even goes so far as to say most of what they used to do was in the courtyard. That's why in Hanukkah, by the way, there's a big shita that says you should light right on your where your doorway meets the courtyard, because then everyone in the courtyard will see everything, because that's like a public domain over there where thousands of people are there doing all their laundry and this and that and the other. And there's another shita that you should do it at the entrance of the courtyard to the street, but whatever. So here we're talking about the backyard, so maybe there were backyards that were used, but most of them probably weren't. And then Rosh said this one was called the muksa because it was pushed off to behind the house. And Rashi says another factor. Well,
we don't go in, we don't often go in and out of this place.
Right. People tend to not go in and come out of it very often.
Sham. For the place we place, in this place we place wood. וכל דבר שאין דעת ליטול עד זמן מרובה.
You put wood, v'kol davar, and any other thing, which
likewise anything that there's no intention of using over a long period of time.
Right, until a long period of time. Right? In other words, it's like a storage unit. A storage unit where you put stuff there that say, I don't need it in the next few months, I'm going to need it eventually. So anything you put there eventually, so I think there are people that use their backyards for storing stuff that they never use and they only intend to use it after a long period of time. But whatever, that's why it's called muksa, right? Because the whole idea of muksa is it's pushed off to the margin where you don't really use it so much. So here it's an area which the whole area is sort of like pushed off and marginalized as being an area where you just store things which aren't even really used very often. So that's why it turns out that this area which has wood should be considered, the wood in there should be considered a muksa. Why? Because when did you think to use this wood that's scattered about over there? And not only scattered about, it could even be if it was in a proper pile back there. Because Rashi says, even if I did store it back there, I did put it back there to properly store it, but what was my intention? To use it after a very long period of time, Zman Meruba. So in that case, it's a little bit like the straw, because what did Rashi say about the straw? You're not used to using it. You're just not, it's not your normal day-to-day thing. So therefore, when Shabbos or Yom Tov came in, what was your thoughts? To use it or not to use it? Most likely not to use it, because that's, unless you specifically thought to use it, probably you just had in mind the norm. The norm is this kind of stuff is going to be away from human usage for a while. So that's a reason to consider muksa. So therefore, Rashi hasn't really said so. He will say it in a minute, but we have therefore an opinion here that you can't move this wood because it's muksa. So that's why he says, Uba Gemora.
The Gemora parish sefer the Resha. So the way the Gemora it explains both.
No, parich means it asks.
It asks in the beginning.
The real word pari comes from the word lifroch, by the way.
It's a stira, right?
No, it does end up being a stira, but the word pari, just to know the root of the word, it means to break.
Right.
A pircha is really when you break something. But it's also a question which ended up being so difficult to answer that it kind of broke the argument, as it were. But this is often used as the verb for asking a question in the Gemara. So it's going to ask the question of a seifa l'reisha, meaning a contradiction of what's written in the seifa, i.e. the last part of the sentence here about the wood, that you can't move it, to the reisha where it said you could move the straw, which is equally as much a reason to call it muksa. So, as Rashi said before, who wrote this Mishnah? Someone who holds a muksa or someone doesn't? That looks like a stira now.
Right.
Because what?
Mashma.
Mashma. You see, it's interesting. Do you notice Rashi uses the same exact expression again now? Hashta mashma. which we said hashta mashma means what?
Yeah, at this
Now, at this point, when we're just reading it for our first time, it would seem to be
understand that he does hold
that-
Muktzah.
that it is a person who holds a muksa. So again, Rashi sort of hedged his bets. He says the first part seems to be a person who doesn't hold a muksa. Now he's saying, now it seems to be that this second part is written by someone who does hold a muksa. Obviously, the whole thing has to be re-examined later, so Rashi's sort of hedged his bets. We don't know which one is going to give. The first part is going to be considered true, and the second part has to give. Or the second part is what's considered true, and the first part has to give. Or maybe both have to give. Rashi sort of set it up that both parts are going to have to be changed. Because only now we're thinking the first part, he doesn't hold a muksa, and now we're thinking the second part is where he does hold a muksa. So it sounds like both of those things are going to end up changing, which is interesting. That means we're going to re-examine the entire thing and come up with perhaps an entirely different way of learning the Mishnah. That both perspectives will be blown out of the water, as it were. Okay, so that was an adequate...
There's a stir between the Rosh and the Sefer.
I'm sorry?
There's a stir between the Rosh and the Sefer.
But the way Rashi makes it sound, it's only what we call an apparent stira. That really, when we understand it fully, we may end up re-examining it and saying it's not a stira at all. Right? Whenever we have these kind of mishnayos, we can either re-examine the whole thing and say we just didn't understand it properly, and then with our new understanding, perhaps it's not a contradiction at all. Or we may end up keeping it the way we understand it and just adding a few extra words where we say they were just two different parts of a Mishnah that we thought they went together. They don't really go together. There's different options for how to try to answer it up, but it seems the way it is in front of us now, it's untenable. To have the same sentence that you say, this you can do, this you can't do. It sounds like the same person talking in both halves of the sentence. They say, well, when he said this you can do, he didn't hold a muksa. When he said this you can't do, he changed his mind and told you we have a problem with muksa. Seems like something's not quite right here. So Rashi already alerted us to that, and Rashi doesn't always tell us what the Gemora is going to ask. If Rashi's already telling us now, it's probably because this was the automatic assumption that you would have made. So Rashi right away wants to deal with it. I know you're probably thinking this. Don't worry, the Gemora is aware of it. So very often when Rashi tells you of a problem, well before the Gemora is going to tell you, it's because it probably was so obvious to you, and it was bothering you so much that Rashi, who's like a doctor, wants to put a Band-Aid on it right away and tell you, don't worry, it'll be dealt with. As we say in English, cool it. Right? That's another job of Rashi, to calm us down and make us, first of all, gratified that if we thought of a problem, we're right in thinking of this problem. We're learning properly. But also not to get so wrapped up in it, because the Gemora will deal with it. Okay. So let's go on to the Gemora. Remember, this Mishnah had 3 sections, so most likely the Gemora is going to start with the first section, which was what? How do we carry jugs of wine through the street? We were told that we have to carry it in a way which won't look like chol, and we were told that that means carrying smaller amounts in our hands or on our shoulder without using a box or a basket, and not larger amounts. So on that note, the Gemora starts out actually with adding 1 footnote. So whose job is it to read now? Jack?
The Gemora, right?
Yeah.
Tana,
So what is that, just with that word Tana, what would that mean?
that we learned.
Right, so saying we learned. It could have been like Tanya, really. I'm not sure what the difference between Tana or Tanya would be in this context. It's not a Mishnah, it's like a Beitsa. Perhaps it's telling you it's more connected to the Mishnah than you would think. It's like an appendix to the Mishnah. We learned something in the Mishnah, but there's another Beitsa somewhere that adds like a tidbit that has to be learned in conjunction with the Mishnah. That what?
Im אי אפשר לשנות mutar.
Period.
If it's not possible to change,
Right.
then it's mutar.
Right.
It's doable.
So let's assume that this is being, like I said, an appendix to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah told me if I want to carry 4 bottles to the Suda, not to carry them all together, either like you said, don't carry 4, only carry 2. Drink less wine at this party, right? Or get someone else to carry, right? But don't carry 4. That's the main message that the Mishnah kind of told you. It's going to look bad if you carry 4 because it's going to look like you're what? Doing a weekday activity. Okay? So this Beitsa would therefore be talking to that point and saying, but if it's impossible to avoid carrying 4 at one time, then you're allowed to what? To carry 4 at one time, right? In a box even, right? So basically we would say now, if you put those two together, the Mishnah is saying, if you can do it, if you can manage to do it, carry 2 at a time instead of 4 at a time. But if you can't manage to, if it's impossible, and you have to carry 4 at a time, it's okay. So what does that sound like? Lichatchila and b'di'evet. Lichatchila, try to avoid carrying 4 at a time, etc. But b'di'evet, if you can't avoid it for some reason, it's okay. So it's not that kind of halacha that we're going to stand on it and force you to accept it under all circumstances. It depends what the situation is. So what situation could warrant me being allowed to carry large amounts through the street? So Rashi says, what would that be? What's called impossible to do like only 2 at a time? Which case do I have to carry more? Let's Tuvi, you want to try that, Rashi?
Rashi?
Yeah.
It's impossible to change.
Which means in this case it's impossible to shift from 4 to 2 and to carry them on your shoulder or in your hands.
Right.
What would make that impossible? Keep going. No, I think it's Zimein. Again, Rashi seems to be very economic with his yuds.
Yeah.
Again, this is another case where I would have written this with a yud. Like we said before, with biyadav, I would have written it with a yud. Rashi felt that ink was too expensive, and he's economizing. No yud.
Okay.
But it should be like with the yud.
Because, for example, if he had invited guests,
Right.
or many guests.
Here he's having more than the norm of guests, so he needs more wine.
וצריך להביא ביחד,
Harbe.
ביחד.
Oh, he has to bring a lot at one time. He can't just bring 2, because 2 won't suffice. And he doesn't want to make a lot of trips, like Jack said before. That's not conducive to Yom Tov to make so many trips.
If he has a bunch of
So
guests waiting
then
for him.
he has a big reason to bring a lot at one time. So Chazal are understanding, right? Here Chazal are extremely understanding. They're saying what? Mutter. Right? We'll allow you. So if you can get away with less, because you have a smaller Suda and you don't really need that much, so we're asking you, please take less so that you don't look like you're doing a weekday activity. But if you can't, you're having a lot of people, and you can't avoid it, that's called it's impossible, because we don't ask you to take less wine to a whole Suda. That's for a lot of people. We're appreciating that you need to bring a lot of wine. Not bringing a lot of wine is out of the question. That's impossible. So now your only option is making a lot of trips with 2 at a time, or carrying more. So that's called, again, impossible. Impossible won't, as Jack said before, won't want to force you to take a lot of little trips with 2 at a time. So we're back up to the idea of carrying many, or going without wine that we need at the Suda. So that's called impossible. Once it's impossible, Chazal are understanding and they say it's mutter. That is going to be discussed. What kind of other implements are you allowed to use? That's a good point. I think you would be allowed to, actually. Because we're going to see now, even though it's not a Mishnah or a Beitsa, it's Rava, in his own hometown, he made a certain takana about telling people specifically things that are normally carried one way. He made a takana to carry them in an easier way, but certain of the cases that he talks about are using implements which may be more like we would call today an agala. So I would say yes, I think he would allow you to bring an agala if it makes it easier. But okay, we'll have to see the cases that Rava talks about. Each one of them may be applicable to our modern situation as well. But in any event, that seems to be the point, that avoiding looking like it's a weekday activity is important, but it's not as important as fulfilling the Yom Tov needs of Simcha. Whenever you come to a point where you say, in order to do that, I have to give up my wine, and I have to give up my Simchas Yom Tov, Chazal are obviously appreciative of the fact that Yom Tov is Yom Tov, and you have to have a good time. So therefore, we're not going to have you sacrifice that when push comes to shove. We'd rather have you chance that people might think it looks like a weekday activity. You could actually argue here that because I'm going to a Suda that's a huge Suda, people will know that I'm not doing it, it's not a weekday activity. They'll know, why is he carrying so much wine at one time? Because he has a big party. I heard Jack's making a big party. But in fact, let's go down there. Right? So you could argue that there won't even look like a weekday activity if it's a big party, because it will be known. But Rashi doesn't mention that, so the way we normally learn Rashi is not to inject other things into Rashi, but however, we have to be aware that it's possible that once the situation is different, that you have a lot of people coming over, it also changes what people know. When they look at you in the street, they may not just conclude that you're doing a weekday activity anymore, they may already know that it's for Yom Tov. But that's not in Rashi, so it's conjecture. In any event, it seems better to use the other way of learning Rashi, which is that when push comes to shove, that you have to decide Simchas Yom Tov versus this idea of changing from the way we do it during the week. As nice as that is, we like it says, if it's impossible to do that, then it's mutter. Not because it won't look like the weekday, but because even if it does, still Yom Tov is Yom Tov, and you have to have your simcha. In any event, okay, so let's go on with Rava now. Rava had a bunch of things that he decreed in his hometown, which it seems like the Gemora was very happy with what he did, and would probably recommend that everyone emulate this. And it seems to be sort of a paradigm for how to handle different activities, which again, we're talking about things like carrying major objects through the public thoroughfare and looking good or looking bad. So therefore, Rava made a sort of a handbook over here of what to do. Okay, so Tuvia.
Hakim Rava, Mekuza.
By the way, it's Rava, not Rava.
I said,
I know, whatever. I'm just saying, people confuse the two. It's good sometimes to keep it separate,
Yeah,
just
good.
to make sure you know who we're talking about.
Right. So Rava instituted in Mekuza.
Right, which is where he was the head Rav, right? That's where he was the chief rabbi.
The Daru Yuchaka, if there's something that they normally carry on their shoulder with exertion, the Daru Beragla, to
So the Lamed makes it, he should do it.
he should do it.
I like to say the Lamed, and sometimes you have a Lamed Yud at the beginning of a verb. It's like saying let.
Yeah,
Let it be done, let him carry it
with a pitchfork.
with a pitchfork, right? So pitchfork may not be what we call a pitchfork. It might be more like some kind of an apparatus with a leverage of a pitchfork that you can carry something almost like an agala and have it not be heavy, not be exerting. So what did he say over here? If you normally carry something on your shoulder, again, make some kind of a change from the way you do it during the week to make it easier by carrying it on this pitchfork thing, which is an easier way of carrying it. Okay? But Didaro
Beragla.
Ragla is something that you normally do carry with a pitchfork. Rashi says it's a much bigger kind of a barrel.
The Daruba Agrara, carry with a. You should carry.
So
with
let
a,
him
with a
carry
pole,
it
with a pole.
with a pole. Good. So that's going to be two people, Rashi says. Now you have to get another person involved. To two people with some kind of a pole between them and this hanging off that pole. Then it's going to be easier, again, to carry the larger object. But, like the Meraglim, exactly. But the point here is that he's asking you to do something that you wouldn't normally do. So it's the effect of that is to keep this idea that Chazal has taught us in this Mishnah that you're supposed to try to change from the way you normally do it. Right? Again, it's talking about something you're carrying, that people are going to see the way you're carrying it, and if you don't change, it's going to look like you're doing a weekday activity. which generally speaking, we're trying to get you to avoid looking like you're doing a weekday activity.
Right.
So that's A. A is we like to try, we know from the previous halacha that it's not always a must, but we try at least to change from the way we normally do it. But Rava here had to institute it because he had to make it a rule that apparently people would know these are the rules. That if you normally carry it in one way, you have to change it, but he instituted that as well. How do you change it? You have to change it specifically to the things he's mentioning here, because that, as Rashi will point out, always is something that makes it easier. That's the point. Each one of these things he's instituting is something that is not only changing it from the way you normally do it, but also making it easier. Because if it makes it harder, that's like the case we had before. That we say, oh, I can't do that, it's too hard. Therefore, you're allowed to do it the normal way. Well, you only have to change it if it's not going to be harder. So he's going through all of these things. If you normally carry it A, then carry it B. If you normally carry it B, then carry it C. You normally carry it ba'agra, you carry it with the pole, like the meraglim. Then what do you do to change it? How are you gonna downgrade it now to do it differently? Then do it ba'achba. Achba, Rashi says, is you're still carrying the pole, but instead of it being on my shoulder and on your shoulder, like in the meraglim, as Jack said, I'm holding it in my hand and you're holding it in your hand. So you're lowering it down. You're basically lowering down the pole to be carried between you. So again, I'm changing from the normal way. That's what we see from our Mishnah. That's a very laudable thing that we should try lechatchila to do. But he's saying to do it in this way because it will be either easier or, at least Rashi says, not harder. Right? That's the point. It's not that I'm trying to make it easier. I'm trying to make it different from the way I do it during the week. But there's a different condition attached to it that I can't do that if it's going to make it harder. But I can do it if it's not going to be harder. Right? So if it's as easy to do it both ways, so what do I gain if I don't do it on my shoulder? I do it here. What am I gaining? Oh, you know what you're gaining? You did it differently than the weekday. Not that you're making life easier, right? But it's not appreciative harder. It's about equal. So therefore, you have gained. What have I gained? You avoided doing the normal weekday way. Okay, and therefore, we know that that's right. It's like doing a Yom Tov, right? So this is an extra way to be mechabed Yom Tov, right? They found ways of being mechabed Yom Tov that are built into these seemingly mundane tasks. Okay, so that's another thing. But again, each time he wants to tell a person if it's something that normally is carried a certain way to change. So now he talks about the second thing. Dedaro ba'achva aluye. So something dedaro ba'achva that normally you carry it what?
With a handheld pole.
With the handheld poles between two people. So now what are you going to do? Lower it down to the floor? What are you going to do?
They're saying.
So there's nothing you can really do here to make it easy to change it. If anything you do now will just probably make it harder. So he's saying, so what is left to do?
We'll spread a cloth of some sort.
That's right. You spread like a curtain over it, right? And that will.
And they carry it on top of the curtain between the two poles.
Something like that. That's right. So you're carrying it the normal way. What about changing from the weekday? You did something a bit different, Rashi says. You spread the curtain over it, right? You spread something over it. That you don't normally do. Plus, Rashi says you're gaining, that in a sense you're hiding the activity. So again, if someone looks out in the street, they don't see you like just blatantly doing something like the weekday. Either A, they'll see it's a different thing because you drape something over it, or they won't really notice it so much because it's hidden from view. So either way, you've gained on that level, that it doesn't right away look to someone who's just observing you casually from the street that you're doing something this weekday. Now, what about something else?
If it's
So this is
not
what we
impossible.
started out with, right?
If it's not impossible, then you can do it the regular way.
That's right. So now we go back to the same rule that was in the Beitsa that we started with. And if it's impossible to do that, if any of these things are impossible, or the last one at least about putting a curtain over, I'm not sure why that would be impossible, but I'm sure Rashi will tell us how that could be impossible. If for some reason it's going to be impossible, which you know in this sugya means harder, right? In this sugya, impossible means harder, like the case of the wine. We said it's impossible to carry 2 at a time. No, it's not. Carry 2 at a time, make 10 trips. No, that would be too hard. So impossible in this sugya means harder. So if it's impossible, i.e. the only other way to do it would be something that's harder, then shari, which is the Aramaic word for mutter. Right? So it's exactly in Aramaic what the Beitsa said originally in Hebrew. If it's impossible, meaning it's going to be too hard to change from the norm, or do something different than the norm, then it's mutter. Then you don't have to worry. Okay, we'll stop here.